He-Jin stood at the viewing window of the transport ship, watching as the massive Galactic Council station grew larger. His heart beat faster as the silver structure sparkled against the backdrop of stars. After 3 years of training on Earth, he was finally here, his first assignment as a junior diplomat. "First time seeing the station?" asked a soft voice behind him. He-Jin turned to see Du-Yun, his assigned cultural advisor, floating gracefully in the zero gravity. Even in space, Du-Yun managed to look perfectly put together in his diplomatic uniform. "Is it that obvious?" He-Jin laughed, pushing away from the window. "I've seen pictures, but they don't do it justice." "Wait until you see the aliens," Du-Yun said with a smile. "Pictures don't do them justice either." The transport ship docked with a gentle thud. He-Jin gathered his things, double-checking that his gravity boots were properly activated. The last thing he wanted was to float away during his first meeting with the Galactic Council representatives. As they walked through the airlock, a tall, crystalline figure waited for them. The alien's body sparkled with different colors, like sunlight through a prism. This was Ambassador Ryan of the Lumini, according to He-Jin's briefing files. "Welcome to Galactic Council Station 7, Ryan said, their voice chiming like bells. "You are the new human diplomat from the Death World Earth." He-Jin noticed how the other aliens in the docking bay moved away slightly at the word Death World. He was used to this reaction. Most alien species came from worlds with perfect weather and few natural disasters. They couldn't understand how humans survived on a planet with earthquakes, hurricanes, and extreme temperatures. "Yes, Ambassador Ryan." He-Jin bowed slightly. "I'm He-Jin, Earth's new junior diplomat. Thank you for meeting us." "Your politeness circuits are well maintained," Ryan said, "though I observe you are not actually a machine." Du-Yun coughed quietly behind him. "Right. The briefing had mentioned that Lumini took everything literally. It's a figure of speech," He-Jin explained. "Humans often say things that aren't exactly true to be polite or friendly." The colors in Ryan's crystalline body swirled in confusion. "You speak untruths to show respect. This does not compute. Maybe we should move on to the tour," Du-Yun suggested quickly. They walked through the station's wide corridors. He-Jin tried not to stare at the amazing variety of alien species around them. There were floating gas clouds in containment fields, spider-like creatures scuttling along the walls, and even what looked like walking plants. "Your quarters are in the Earth gravity section," Ryan explained. "We have adjusted the artificial gravity to match your Death World conditions. Most species find it crushing, but you should be comfortable." They passed through several security checkpoints, where Ta-1, the human security chief, nodded to them. He-Jin had read about him, another Death Worlder who had earned respect by being able to handle the physical demands of station security. "The medical bay is here," Ryan continued, gesturing to a large set of doors. "Dr. Jae-yun, your human medical officer, is available if the station's atmosphere causes you distress." "I'm sure I'll be fine," He-Jin said with a smile. "Earth's atmosphere is much harsher." "Ah yes, your toxic oxygen-nitrogen mix." Ryan's colors shifted to a concerned purple. "We still don't understand how your species survives breathing corrosive gases." They reached the diplomatic offices, where other alien representatives were gathering for the day's meetings. He-Jin noticed how they all gave him extra space, as if afraid the Death Worlder might do something unpredictable. "The first meeting begins in 10 minutes, Ryan announced. "We will discuss trade routes through the spiral arm. Please remember that any aggressive movements will trigger the safety fields." "Don't worry," He-Jin said. "I promise not to hurt anyone." "But you just said humans sometimes say things that aren't true." Ryan's colors swirled frantically. "Are you promising truth or speaking a polite untruth?" He-Jin opened his mouth, then closed it again. Behind him, Du-Yun was trying not to laugh. This was going to be an interesting assignment. As He-Jin took his seat at the large meeting table, he couldn't help but smile. Here he was, a human from Earth, sitting among beings from across the galaxy. Yes, they called his home a death world. Yes, they treated him like he might break something just by breathing. But he was here to build bridges between worlds, even if those bridges had to span gaps wider than simple space. He just hoped he wouldn't accidentally start any diplomatic incidents by using too many figures of speech. 3 weeks into his assignment, He-Jin was ready to bang his head against the station's reinforced walls. Another meeting with the Lumini trade delegation had gone nowhere because they couldn't understand why humans used roundabout language in negotiations. "I don't see why you can't simply state your exact terms," Ryan said, their crystalline form glowing with frustration. "Why say we might consider when you mean no?" He-Jin sat in his office, watching the stars through the viewport. Du-Yun floated nearby, checking reports on his tablet. "Maybe we should just be completely literal with them," He-Jin sighed. "Like when we were kids playing Opposite Day." He stopped suddenly, eyes widening. Du-Yun looked up sharply. "He-Jin, whatever you're thinking, stop thinking it." "No, but think about it." He-Jin sat up straighter. "Opposite Day helped us understand different ways of communicating when we were young. It was like a game that taught us about non-literal speech." "These are crystalline aliens who take everything literally," Du-Yun warned. "Their brains are structured completely differently from ours. You can't just." The office door chimed, and Ryan entered with several junior Lumini delegates. Their crystals sparkled with what He-Jin had learned to recognize as curiosity. "We have questions about human negotiation techniques," Ryan announced. "Our analysis suggests humans spend 47% of communication time saying things they don't mean." He-Jin opened his mouth to explain, but then remembered his earlier thought. "Actually, that's not entirely correct. Sometimes we say exactly what we mean by saying the opposite." Du-Yun groaned quietly. The Lumini delegate's colors swirled in confusion. "Please explain this contradiction," Ryan requested. "Well," He-Jin said, choosing his words carefully, "humans have this tradition called Opposite Day. It's a day when everyone agrees to say the opposite of what they mean, and everyone understands that's what's happening." The office fell silent. The Lumini delegates stood completely still, their crystals pulsing with rapid color changes as they processed this information. "This is a real tradition?" one of the junior delegates asked. "Oh yes," He-Jin said, warming to his subject. "It helps children learn about different ways of communicating. If I say, 'This room is freezing on Opposite Day,' everyone knows I mean it's very hot." But, Ryan's form was practically strobing now. "How do you know when it is this opposite day?" "People usually announce it," He-Jin explained. "They say today is opposite day, and then everyone knows to interpret everything backwards." "Fascinating," another Lumini delegate chimed in. "This explains many human communication patterns. It is a formalized system for speaking untruths that are actually truths." Du-Yun was making frantic stop-talking gestures behind the Lumini, but He-Jin was too excited about finally making progress in cultural understanding. "Exactly. It's like a game that teaches us to think flexibly about communication." The Lumini delegates huddled together, their crystals synchronizing into a pattern of pulsing lights that He-Jin had never seen before. After a moment, they turned back to him. "We request formal documentation about this opposite day tradition," Ryan announced. "The Lumini diplomatic corps will study it to better understand human communication patterns." "I'll be happy to provide that," He-Jin said, ignoring Du-Yun's quiet facepalm in the corner. After the Lumini left, Du-Yun floated over to He-Jin's desk. "You do realize what you've done, right? Help them understand human communication better. You've just introduced the concept of systematic lying to a species that's never told a single untruth in their entire civilization's history." He-Jin's smile faded slightly. "When you put it that way, it does sound a bit problematic." "A bit problematic." Du-Yun shook his head. "The Lumini share everything they learn with their entire species through their crystalline network. By tomorrow, every Lumini on this station will know about opposite day. Well, how bad could it be? Hijin asked. It's just a simple concept. The station's intercom crackled to life. Attention all personnel. The Lumini delegation has requested an emergency meeting to discuss the implementation of human communication protocols. All diplomatic staff report to Conference Room Alpha immediately. Hijin and Du Yun looked at each other. You had to ask. Du Yun sighed. Come on, let's go deal with your mess. As they headed to the conference room, Hijin couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just started something much bigger than a simple cultural exchange. The next morning, Hijin knew something was wrong the moment he stepped out of his quarters. A group of Lumini were floating down the corridor, their crystals flashing in synchronized patterns. Good morning, Hijin called out politely. Terrible evening. The Lumini responded in unison, their crystals glowing with pride at their response. Hijin's stomach dropped. Before he could say anything else, his communicator buzzed. It was Ta Wan, the security chief. Get to the main cafeteria now. Ta Wan's voice was tense. We have a situation. When Hijin arrived at the cafeteria, he found complete chaos. The Lumini delegation was there in full force, and they were ordering food in the most confusing way possible. I absolutely do not want a nutrient pack, one Lumini announced to the confused food dispenser and I would hate to have it heated to exactly 300 degrees. I don't want to sit by the window, another Lumini declared, promptly walking to the window seats, and I definitely won't consume my meal there. Du Yun appeared at Hijin's side, looking like he hadn't slept. They're all doing it. Every single Lumini on the station has embraced opposite day. They spent all night studying the concept and spreading it through their crystal network. But I never said it was today, Hijin protested. Oh, it gets better, Du Yun said grimly. Watch this. Go ask one of them if it's opposite day. Hijin approached the nearest Lumini. Excuse me, is today opposite day? The Lumini's crystals sparkled with delight. No, it absolutely is not opposite day, they said proudly. Hijin felt a headache coming on. But if it's opposite day and you say it's not, then it is. The Lumini finished, their crystals pulsing with joy. We have mastered the recursive logic loop of the announcement paradox. Just then, Ryan floated into the cafeteria. I am not here to announce that we are not implementing the human communication protocol of opposite day, they chimed happily. And we are definitely not excited about this cultural exchange. The station's intercom crackled. This is station control. We are receiving unusual requests from the Lumini engineering team. Can someone from Diplomatic please clarify why they're asking us to not adjust the environmental controls to not change the temperature to not 20 degrees? Hijin looked at Du Yun in panic. The engineering team is doing it too. The entire Lumini species operates on a shared network, remember? Du Yun rubbed his temples. What one learns, they all learn. Right now, every Lumini on this station thinks they're participating in an important human cultural tradition. A small crowd was gathering at the cafeteria entrance. Representatives from other species watched in confusion as the Lumini continued their opposite communications. I do not need to speak with Ambassador Hijin, Ryan announced, floating directly toward him. And we are not concerned about the trade negotiations scheduled for today. The trade negotiations. Hijin's eyes widened. We can't let them conduct diplomatic business like this. Too late, Du Yun pointed to his tablet. The Lumini have already sent out meeting updates to all species. According to this, they will not be attending the not-important meeting that isn't happening at the time that isn't scheduled. The station's medical officer, Jai Yun, pushed through the growing crowd. Has anyone else noticed the Lumini crystals are vibrating at a different frequency than usual? She asked, holding up a scanner. Their molecular structure is showing signs of stress. Hijin watched as the Lumini continued their opposite conversations, their crystals pulsing faster and brighter than normal. What had seemed like a simple cultural exchange was quickly turning into a potential diplomatic crisis. "We need to do something," he said. "Don't worry," Du Yun replied with heavy sarcasm. According to the Lumini's latest announcement, they are definitely not planning to explain opposite day to all other species on the station to prevent miscommunications. As if on cue, a group of Lumini approached the watching aliens, their crystals bright with enthusiasm. "We would hate to share this fascinating human tradition with you," they began. He Jin grabbed Du Yun's arm. "We have to stop this before." The station's lights flickered. Over the intercom, a stressed voice announced, "Engineering reports the Lumini maintenance team is, not fixing the power regulators by not adjusting the settings to not optimal levels. Can someone please translate what they're trying to tell us?" He Jin looked around the chaotic cafeteria, watching as confusion spread among the station's residents. He had wanted to help the Lumini understand human communication better, but this was quickly spiraling out of control. And it was only the beginning of the day. By midday, the situation on the station had gone from bad to worse. He Jin stood in the security office with Taiwan, watching the monitor showing scenes from around the station. Each screen showed a different kind of chaos. "The gaseous collective are the latest ones to get confused," Taiwan said, pointing to a screen where floating clouds of colored gas were trying to communicate with a group of Lumini. "They absorb emotions through chemical exchange, and right now they're getting very mixed signals." On the screen, a purple gas cloud was turning green with confusion as a Lumini announced, "I absolutely do not wish to discuss trade agreements with your species." "Look at this one." Taiwan switched to another camera. In the hydroponics bay, the plant-like Verdani were waving their leaf branches in distress as Lumini engineers announced they were not fixing the not-broken water recyclers. Du Yun rushed into the security office, his tablet displaying multiple flashing alerts. "The trading floor is in complete chaos," he reported. "The Lumini are trying to buy and sell using opposite statements. Nobody knows if they're actually buying or selling anymore." He Jin watched as the screen showed more and more species getting tangled in the confusion. The spider-like arachnids were spinning webs in defensive patterns, unsure if the Lumini were threatening them or not. The slug-like mollusca had retreated into their shells entirely. "I don't understand," a voice chimed behind them. They turned to see Ryan floating there, their crystals pulsing rapidly. "We are not doing an excellent job of implementing the human tradition. Why is everyone not understanding our not confusing communications?" Jai-yun burst into the office before He Jin could respond. The medical officer's face was worried as she held up her scanner. "The Lumini crystalline structures are showing increasing stress patterns," she reported. "Their attempt to maintain two opposing thoughts at once is affecting their physical form." On the screens, He Jin could see what she meant. The Lumini's usually smooth crystal surfaces were developing tiny cracks, and their color pulses were becoming erratic. "I am not concerned about these readings," Ryan announced, but their voice chimed at an unusually high pitch. A new alert flashed across the security screens. In the main docking bay, a Lumini trade delegation was greeting a newly arrived merchant ship. "We do not welcome you to the station," the Lumini announced to the confused merchants. "We will not be happy to not trade with you today." The merchant ship promptly began powering up its engines to leave. "That's the third ship today," Taiwan groaned. "At this rate, we'll lose half our trading partners by evening." He Jin's communicator buzzed with an urgent message from station control. Multiple system malfunctions reported. Lumini maintenance crews are giving contradictory instructions to repair robots. Environmental controls are fluctuating. Please advise. Du Yun checked his tablet again, and his eyes widened. The Galactic Council is calling an emergency session. They're not happy about the trading disruptions. On another screen, two Lumini delegates were talking to a group of mechanical-based life forms. "We do not think your processors are very efficient," they chimed. The mechanical being's lights turned red with either anger or confusion. No one could tell which. "I'm getting reports of headaches from telepathic species," Jai-yun added. They say trying to read Lumini thoughts right now is like looking at an optical illusion. He-jin watched as more screens showed more chaos. The Lumini were now teaching other species about opposite day, leading to even more confusion as some tried to participate while others refused. We are not very pleased with the success of this cultural exchange, Ryan announced, their crystal surface showing visible stress lines now. And we are definitely not planning to share this tradition with the next shift of Lumini arriving tomorrow. Tomorrow. He-jin, Do-yun, Ta-won, and Jai-yun all exclaimed at once. The station's lights flickered again. Through the window, they could see a merchant ship declaring an emergency quarantine, apparently believing the station had been infected with some sort of logic virus. I'm not saying this is the worst diplomatic incident in station history, Do-yun said slowly, but it's definitely in the top 3. He-jin watched another screen where Illumini was telling the cafeteria AI that they did not want their meal served at a temperature that wasn't cold. The AI had been attempting to process this request for the past 20 minutes. They needed to find a solution fast, before the entire station descended into complete chaos. But how do you explain to a literal-minded species that they're taking a non-literal tradition too literally? The station's main control room was filled with warning lights and the sound of alarms. He-jin stood with Station Commander Park as they watched systems failing one by one across the main display screen. The Lumini maintenance crew just told the life support computer they don't want to not turn off the oxygen recyclers. Commander Park said, his face pale. The computer has shut down 3 times trying to process these instructions. He-jin watched in horror as red warning lights spread across the station mat. The Lumini's opposite speak was confusing the station's artificial intelligence, causing it to malfunction. Can't we just shut them out of the systems? He-jin asked. The Lumini crystals are part of the station's core systems, Commander Park explained. Their natural ability to store and process data makes them essential to our operations. We can't just disconnect them. Do-yun rushed into the control room, nearly floating off his feet in its hurry. The Lumini are now having meetings about how to not have meetings, he reported. They've tied up every conference room on the station with discussions about not discussing things. A new alarm blared. On the main screen, the station's power grid began to flash red. I am not here to report a problem, a Lumini engineer announced, floating into the room. The power cores are not overheating because we did not adjust the cooling systems to not work at maximum capacity. Jai-yun followed close behind the engineer, her medical scanner beeping rapidly. Their crystal structures are showing serious strain, she said. The constant opposite thinking is creating microfractures in their matrix. The station shuddered. Emergency lights kicked on as the main lighting flickered and died. Backup power activated, the station's AI announced. Warning, multiple system conflicts detected. Unable to process maintenance instructions. Through the control room's window, He-jin could see Lumini floating through the corridors, their usually bright crystal forms now dulled and cracking. They were still trying to teach other species about opposite day, even as their own bodies showed signs of breaking down. I don't feel very not well, the Lumini engineer said, their voice chiming at an odd frequency. Small pieces of crystal were starting to flake off their surface. Get them to medical, Jai-yun ordered. As they helped the engineer out, more alarms started blaring. Station stability at 60% and falling, the AI reported. Unable to maintain optimal conditions. Environmental controls failing. Taiwan's voice came over the comm system. Security to control. We've got multiple species requesting emergency evacuation. 3 more trade ships just left the dock. The gaseous collective is threatening to release distress chemicals. He-jin watched as chaos spread across every deck of the station. The Lumini's attempt to embrace human communication styles was literally tearing them, and the station, apart. We are not experiencing any problems, Ryan announced, floating into the control room. but their crystal form was showing obvious signs of stress, with visible cracks spreading across their surface. Everything is not going exactly as we didn't plan. Another violent shudder ran through the station. The main viewport showed several emergency pods launching from the lower decks as other species began to evacuate. Cooling systems critical, the AI announced. Power core temperature rising. Station spin stabilizers offline. They've done it, Commander Park said quietly. The Lumini have confused the station systems so thoroughly that nothing knows what it's supposed to do anymore. He-Jin looked at the main display, watching as more and more systems turned red. The Lumini had wanted to understand human communication better, but their literal minds couldn't handle the cognitive dissonance of constantly saying the opposite of what they meant. Now the entire station was paying the price. "We're not very sorry," Ryan said, their voice growing weaker as more cracks appeared in their crystal surface. "We didn't want to understand humans better." The station shuddered again. Through the corridors, Ho-Jin could see other Lumini floating aimlessly, their crystals dulling and cracking as their minds struggled with the concept of deliberate opposite speak. "Main power at 30%, the AI warned. Station stability failing. Beginning emergency protocols." Ho-Jin realized they had minutes, maybe hours, before the station's systems failed completely. They needed to find a way to end this, to help the Lumini understand that not everything humans did needed to be copied exactly. But first, they had to save the station, and the Lumini themselves, from their well-meaning but disastrous attempt at cultural exchange. Jai-Yun's medical bay was filled with Lumini in various states of distress. Their usually bright crystal forms had become cloudy, with crack lines spreading across their surfaces like spider webs. He-Jin watched as she scanned another patient, her face growing more worried with each reading. "Their crystal matrix is breaking down," she explained, showing him the scanner's display. "It's like their bodies can't handle the strain of maintaining two opposing thoughts at once." A sharp crack echoed through the medical bay. One of the Lumini had developed a large split down their middle, light leaking from the fracture. "I am not in pain," they chimed weakly, their voice distorted. "This is not concerning at all." Do-Yun rushed into the medical bay, dodging floating pieces of crystal that had broken off from the patients. "Half the station's systems are offline," he reported. The Lumini engineering team tried to fix things by telling the computers they did not want to not repair the problems. Now the AI has crashed completely. Through the medical bay windows, Ho-Jin could see the emergency lights flashing in the corridors. The station's artificial gravity was becoming unstable, causing loose objects to float randomly. "Their entire society is based on absolute truth and literal meaning," Jai-Yun said, treating another cracking patient. "Forcing their minds to constantly think in opposites is like trying to run a computer program backwards. It's destroying their basic structure." Taiwan's voice crackled over the emergency comm system. "Security alert. The Lumini crystal network is showing signs of cascade failure. If their shared consciousness breaks down, we'll lose all station data storage." He-Jin felt the station shudder again. Without the Lumini's crystal network, the station would lose life support, navigation, and power distribution all at once. Thousands of lives would be at risk. Ryan floated into the medical bay, their once bright form now almost completely gray. Pieces of their crystal surface were falling away like autumn leaves. "We are not failing in our attempt to understand human communication," they chimed, their voice crackling like breaking glass. "This is not causing us any difficulty at all." "Stop," He-Jin shouted, unable to watch anymore. "Please, just stop trying to speak in opposites. Look what it's doing to you." "But we are not trying to be good diplomats," Ryan insisted, more cracks appearing. "We do not want to show we can adapt to human ways." Another Lumini nearby suddenly shattered, their form breaking into hundreds of small crystals. The pieces floated in the air, still weakly glowing and trying to speak in opposites. "Their shared network is making it worse," Jai-Yun realized, checking her readings. "When one of them breaks, the stress transfers to all the others. It's creating a feedback loop. The station's remaining systems screamed in protest as the Lumini crystal network began to fail. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut throughout the station as sections lost power and atmosphere control. "We have to end this now," Du Yun said, ducking as more crystal fragments floated past. "Before we lose the whole station." But the Lumini weren't stopping. Even as they broke apart, they kept trying to speak in opposites, their dedication to understanding human communication literally tearing them apart. "I am not beginning to understand," Ryan said, their voice barely audible as more pieces fell away. "Humans do not use opposite speak to show flexibility of thought. We are not trying to show we can be flexible too." Hajin watched in horror as more Lumini began to crack and break. The medical bay was filling with floating crystal shards, each piece still pulsing weakly with light as the Lumini refused to give up their attempt at human-style communication. The station groaned as its support systems continued to fail. Without the Lumini network, they were losing control of everything from air circulation to waste management. "Their society is based on perfect truth and logic," Jai-Yun said, trying to contain the floating crystal fragments. "But they're so determined to understand us that they're willing to break themselves apart trying." He-Jin looked at the suffering Lumini, then at his fellow humans. They had to find a way to end this, to show the Lumini that understanding humans didn't mean destroying themselves. But as more crystal fragments filled the air and more station systems failed, He-Jin wondered if they'd realized this truth before it was too late. The Lumini's greatest strength, their unified, logical minds, was becoming their greatest weakness as they all broke down together, united even in their self-destruction. They needed a solution fast, before the entire species shattered in their desperate attempt to be more human-like. John walked into the old house. It was dark inside. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling. Dust covered everything. The floorboards creaked under his feet. He shined his flashlight around. Broken furniture lay scattered about. Torn curtains hung in the windows. Faded portraits stared down from the walls. The musty smell of decay filled the air. In the living room, something caught his eye. An old book sat on a dusty shelf. He picked it up and blew off the dust. Strange symbols covered the cover. He opened it and began flipping through the yellowed pages. Suddenly, a gust of cold wind blew through the room. The pages of the book fluttered wildly. John dropped the book in surprise. It landed on the floor with a thud still open. He bent down to retrieve it. As he reached for the book, the symbols on the page began to glow with an eerie light. John froze, transfixed by the sight. The symbols shifted and changed, forming words he could understand. "Unleash the darkness," the words said. "Speak the incantation and release my power." John felt a strange compulsion come over him. Without knowing why, he began to read the words aloud. His voice echoed in the empty room. As he reached the final word, the house shook. The walls vibrated, and the ground trembled beneath him. A deep boom sounded, like thunder right overhead. Black smoke started pouring out of the book, rising into the air. It swirled and coalesced, forming a humanoid shape. Glowing red eyes appeared in the darkness. John staggered back in terror, dropping the book. The dark figure hovered before him, wisps of black smoke curling around it. "You have freed me, mortal," the figure said, its voice a raspy whisper. "Now you shall witness the rise of the Shadow King." The figure threw back its head and let out a bone-chilling laugh. John turned and ran, fleeing the room as fast as he could. The laughter echoed behind him as he burst out the front door into the night. He didn't stop running until he reached the road. Gasping for breath, he looked back at the old house on the hill. Darkness gathered around it like a shroud. In the topmost window, two red eyes glowed in the darkness, looking out over the town below. John shuddered, realizing he had just unleashed something truly evil. He knew he had to find a way to stop it before it was too late. To be continued. John knew he had to act fast. He jumped in his car and sped off into the night. His mind raced as he drove. He had to find a way to stop the evil he had unleashed. He remembered an old friend who might be able to help. Professor Langston was an expert in ancient lore and the occult. If anyone would know what to do, it was him. John arrived at the professor's house and pounded on the door. After a few tense moments, the porch light clicked on, and the door opened. Professor Langston peered out, looking confused and half asleep. "John," he said, "what's going on? It's the middle of the night." "Professor, I need your help," John said urgently. "I found this old book in a haunted house and I accidentally unleashed something evil from it." A dark figure rose out of the book, calling itself the Shadow King. "I don't know what to do." Professor Langston's eyes widened. He pulled John inside and shut the door. "Tell me everything," he said gravely. John recounted the whole story, from finding the book to reading the incantation to the Shadow King's emergence. Professor Langston listened intently, growing more concerned with each word. When John finished, the professor sat back heavily. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "I feared this day would come," he said softly. "The Shadow King is an ancient evil, imprisoned centuries ago by a group of powerful mages. The book you found must have been the key to his prison. What can we do?" John asked desperately. "How do we stop him?" "There is only one way," Professor Langston said. "We must find the mages' descendants, the Order of the Light. Only they possess the knowledge and power to defeat the Shadow King and seal him away once more." "Where do we find them?" John asked. "I don't know," the professor admitted, "but I have some ancient texts that may hold clues. We must begin our research at once. There is no time to lose." John nodded grimly. He knew a long and dangerous road lay ahead of them. But with Professor Langston's help, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to stop the Shadow King before it was too late. Together, they began poring over the professor's ancient books, searching for any scrap of information that could lead them to the Order of the Light and the key to stopping the rising darkness.